The federal government will cap the number of student permits over the next 2 years. It's part of the government's response to the housing crisis amidst concerns about the impact of growing numbers of international students on the housing market. In some provinces, the total reduction of permits will be approximately 50%, with a specific goal of taking action against private colleges.
We hear the word bad actors bountied around. I know my institutions are under heavy regulation inside the province of Ontario, and we wouldn't want it any other way.
We have more reaction from the National Association of Career Colleges coming up, but first let's hear from the minister responsible. Immigration Minister Marc Miller joins me now here at the Cabinet Retreat in Montreal. Minister, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me on, David.
Yeah, you spoke today when you announced this cap about bad actors offering sham degrees, and some of these institutions need to close, in your view. How many institutions do you think need to close in Canada?
Well, if you look at... It's hard to estimate, David, and I think this is where you look at the limit of the federal government to be able to go in jurisdictionally and close places. But certainly, if you look at places in Surrey or Brampton and Mississauga, as well as elsewhere, you see degree-granting institutions that are giving fake business degrees, and basically people are working during the week, doing some work on the weekend, and then getting, perhaps a 3-year ability to work in Canada, and then hoping that they'll be able to stay here. That isn't the international student program that was devised, and the visas that are sought after by people looking to get the best education in the world, including what's offered in Canada. So there's a significant amount of them. The fact that they have exploded in the last couple of years is a sign that we need to rein things in and get this under control. It's a responsibility that we share with provinces.
Are we talking dozens of institutions? Are we talking hundreds of institutions? What's your sense of the order of magnitude here?
I'd venture to think that we are, depending on how they're organized, in the hundreds. We also have the ecosystem that's been created that's been very, very lucrative, where people pay 4 or 5 times what a domestic student would pay. And no one's immune from that. The largest institutions in Canada to the smallest. This has become big business, and you have a lot of players trying to make a quick buck out of this. And the question to the Government of Canada, obviously, given the economic impact of this, is this money that we really want or need in Canada? And I see it as a short-term gain with a lot of long-term pain, and we need to sort of change that conversation.
You mentioned 3 specific areas: Brampton, Mississauga, and Surrey. So is this really a British Columbia and Ontario problem, at least in terms of scale?
No one's immune to it. I mean, what we've seen, there are very few provinces that will not be hit by the cap that we imposed today. There are some provinces that have been regulating this better than others, and there are some that just haven't availed themselves of the international students as others have. I named Ontario and BC. But there will be significant ratcheting back in other provinces as well, with the exception of Saskatchewan, Alberta, Newfoundland, Quebec, and the territories. So this is significant, but given the increase that we've seen over the last 3 years, it's something that we need to get under control. But we also need to put this on the table to make provinces do the jobs that they are supposed to do. The Auditors General of many provinces have pointed out the fact that this needs to be brought under control by provinces, where they have the surgical fine tools to be able to do this in a way that shores up the integrity of the system.
It's not just an issue, though, in private college. I know predominantly that's where you're seeing the challenges, but universities, public colleges have turned to international students to make up for, quite frankly, funding gaps. So as you impose this cap, and you talk about Ontario and BC, we're almost certainly going to see their allotments go down in terms of their number of permits. The knock-on effect of that, as maybe legitimate institutions are captured in this change. What are your concerns there in terms of lost revenue for these institutions and lost opportunity for students?
Lost revenue and, frankly, lost talent if this isn't done correctly. If this is properly instituted, I believe that provinces will be able to be put in a position where they can actually reward the good actors and really shut down and punish the bad ones. They can reallocate this so that our top institutions are getting the international students and the revenue associated to them. No one is innocent in this, but there are some institutions that are doing this better than others. And I would hate to see some of the largest institutions that are world-renowned get punished for no particular reason. It's clear, though, that that growth is unsustainable, and it's causing some carry-on effects in housing, healthcare, and the reputational impact of Canada worldwide as an attractive place to do and have students study and then be able to radiate internationally, it's often become a backdoor for permanent residency, which is not what the program was intended to in the first place.
Right, so the elite institutions, you've got carve-outs in here in terms of limiting work permit restrictions for master's and doctoral level students and spouses, and also professional faculties like law and medicine. Those institutions will probably find a way no matter what. But there's been some concern expressed since you announced this morning about the private college level, sort of the entry level, say, to healthcare professional workspaces, for example, of this maybe creating an unintentional labor shortage, medical technicians, these sorts of things, care workers. How do you guard against that in implementing this?
Well, we'll clearly work with provinces that have those shortages and see some of the effects that it has, and we'll be flexible in being able to grant them postgraduate work permits. The intention is not to ruin anyone's well thought through business model, but to really deal with the perverse incentives, the perverse effects of an ecosystem that's gone a little awry. If a province comes to us and says this particular institution has nurses that will be able to work after, and there's a labor shortage, we'll be flexible with them. But first and foremost, they should take a serious look at the cap that we've imposed, come back to us with our plan to deal with fraud predominantly and shut down institutions that have no reason to exist, as well as to shore up the system. I had a great conversation with my colleague in British Columbia, who had already spent a tremendous amount of time coming up with a system to deal with that in British Columbia. So provinces can look to each other and look at the models that they're putting forward. Quebec has its own unique model here that has been robust as well. So they will be able to benefit from some cap space that hasn't been used. There are incentives here to get things right, but we need them at the table getting things right.
You talk about the role the provinces play in this. They obviously license and regulate post-secondary institutions and would have been responsible in Ontario, for example, with the growth of the private colleges that you're kind of focusing on here. But the permits were still issued by the federal government. So why did your department go along with the surge in the approval of the permits when this was clearly moving at a pace that is now obviously not sustainable?
Look, a couple things, and you're right in saying that, but to be clear, provinces are making money off this, institutions are making money off this. The Government of Canada is the only one sitting at the bar not drinking, and we're about to get stiffed with the bill. And so I think that's something serious that we need to deal with. We do have a role in the ability to use levers. They're pretty rough, turning on taps and turning them off. I had said previously that a national cap, if it were just imposed without having put some thought into it, weighing it by province, being fair, is like doing surgery with a hammer. We need to put provinces on notice to get their acts together, but we also have a role in shoring up the role that we play in eradicating fraud. It's why I announced a recognized institution model that'll separate sort of the wheat from the chaff, and also some more fraud mechanisms. For example, making sure that students have double the financial resources to live in Canada. It's not cheap to live in Canada, as well as verifying offer letters. And then the next step, which is putting in a weighted cap based on the population in provinces in order to make sure that people are just dealing with responsibly with their area of jurisdiction. This is largely an area that has gone uncapped for about 40 years without any problems, and we shut off the taps completely during COVID with a lot of awful effects on these institutions, and we certainly heard from them. But it has ballooned in the last 2 years, and it's time we act.
Is it really just the last 2 years? Because, I mean, in some ways, I wonder if your analogy that everyone's at the bar and you're the only one not drinking, you're going to get stuck with the bill. But the federal government enables this in a way by approving all of the permits, right? So, like, how did it get to the point that it was able to scale up? Because they can accept anybody they want. Nobody can get into the country without the federal approval.
The way it's worked traditionally, David, is we've trusted the designated learning institutions that have been licensed by the provinces. There have been very loose enforcement and verification of those institutions. And the federal government has had a role. In fact, you've seen the statistics of us limiting the levels and numbers of people that are accepted once a institution sets out and gives an offer to someone. So there has been a role, but now it's much more accrued with the availability in doubling the financial funds and making sure that we're verifying offer letters and then putting an intake cap. So to be clear, as of today, we're not taking any more applications until provinces issue a letter to us backing an application. So they do have an interest from now until March 31st to get their houses in order, or else there will be no application and permits issued with respect to any particular province.
So are the provinces just not rigorous enough in their oversight and in their licensing and in their assessment of the institutions that were operating in their jurisdiction? Is that part of the problem here?
It is certainly part of the problem, and you don't need to trust me as the politician. I hope people do, but you'd only need to see the Auditor General reports that have been issued and not heeded in the past, and that's something that will have to be listened to now, or else there'll be no more visas.
This is a final point. I mean, you're making this move, and you've outlined the reasons why, but it's coming at a time when sort of public support for immigration is going down a little bit. It's obviously going to be very politicized in the U.S. election cycle that we're going to see. Do you worry about having to take measures like this and the knock-on effect of that and Canadians' attitude towards immigration? Scarcity of housing, for example, has hardened some people's opinions about bringing in as many people as we do each year. Where do you see this fitting into that continuum?
Well, I think Canadians trust us to do the right thing, and this is certainly the right thing. Having a system that has run amok doesn't help us face the headwinds that are clearly facing the Canadian consensus that has been very positive around immigration. I obviously worry about the international students that are studying today. I'm not out there to target them. They deserve the dignity that they are entitled to as human beings. But clearly, some of them have been part of a system where they've been taken advantage of and given false hope that they may be able to stay in this country. And I don't want them to be hurt. Canadians still are very positive towards immigration, but they've said to various levels of government that we do need to get our acts together, federally, provincially, and territorially, and be more organized when it comes to the impacts on the healthcare system, the impacts on the educational system, the impact on housing. We also need to look at the other side of the equation, which is the services that we have come to know and love in this country that are part of our DNA that wouldn't be there without immigration. And so if we shut off the taps in a way that is just reactionary and I believe unreasonable, we'll have some effects that are far worse than some of the stuff that we're seeing today. But again, today was not a housing announcement. It will have an impact on some areas of housing. It was fundamentally three important measures to make sure that we have a system on international student visas that has some integrity to it.
Immigration Minister Marc Miller, thanks for your time.
Thanks, David.
All right, we're going to turn now to reaction from colleges. The new federal rules around international students may be primarily aimed at private colleges, particularly those deemed to be bad actors. I'm joined by Michael Sangster, CEO of the National Association of Career Colleges. Michael Sangster, it's good to meet you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, David.
I wonder what you made of what Minister Miller said there, that there are potentially hundreds of institutions that need to close because of the role they play in what he considers to be a bad faith system.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there with what the minister said. And I'd just like to jump off by saying we actually support the vast majority of the actions he's been taking. There is an issue that needs to be solved across the whole post-secondary education system around international students. And we do need to make sure we're offering a robust and appropriate system in place for international students who come here. I can't comment on the number of institutions that are my members that might be harmed by this. I will say this, the latest IRCC data says that less than 10% of international students are applying to come to our colleges. We don't believe we are the problem, but we are welcoming the opportunity to work with the province and the federal government, and his team has been excellent in working with us on finding the solutions.
So you say less than 10% are applying to come to your members' colleges. Is every private college out there a member of your organization? Like is this an issue? You know what I mean by that question, and that the sector could be much larger than just who you represent.
I represent about 550 colleges across Canada, and it's fair to say that we represent the major players in the sector, and the vast majority of international students that are in the country would be in our institutions, but I do not represent every regulated career college in Canada.
Right. So do you agree then with the minister's assessment that there could be this subset of private institutions who may or may not be your members, who could be bad faith actors, essentially diploma mills and backdoor entranceways into Canada, and that is an issue that needs to be dealt with, or is he overstating the problem there, sir?
I won't put words in the minister's mouth. I will say this. We work closely with our provincial associations, and we've been working closely with the Department of Immigration to find solutions when problems do arise. I think there's going to be a lot of financial pressure on institutions, not just mine, with these changes that have come in today. That being said, we do support these changes. We do support his increase in funding that students must come to the country with. We think these are important actions that must be taken. But I don't have a number. I don't know how many of our institutions might struggle with these decisions taken today.
There's always unintended consequences with big sweeping policy changes. What concerns do you have there? I know the minister has said that he's willing to work with provinces and other organizations to make sure there are no unintended consequences of true significance here. But what are the areas that are potentially vulnerable to the knock-on effects of this?
Well, I'm concerned about one major one. We're training the workforce that's needed in this country right now. We're training the support workers. You spoke to the minister about the healthcare system. We're training a lot of those long-term care support workers. We're training logistics people. We're training cybersecurity people. And if we're not driving training more individuals to help feed the economy, to help feed those labor force needs, and I was encouraged by the minister's earlier comments that he is focused on labor force needs when he made his last changes. So we're going to continue to work with the provinces. I actually spoke to Minister Dunlop in Ontario today, and she reiterated her commitment to our sector and the great work that we do training workers. And if I might be a little, I'll make it a little personal for you, David. I'll talk about Keene College in Newfoundland and Labrador. The Federal Department of Labor is, with TechNL, is making sure they're training the next generation of cybersecurity workers in Newfoundland and Labrador. We need to do that training.
Right, and that, of course, is Craig Tucker's company, who is the vice chair of your organization, I believe, the vice chair of your board.
Yes.
But I appreciate the role that the private colleges play in it, and I don't think anyone is saying that the institution or the sector in general is illegitimate. But how do you explain, and as you say, it's beyond just the private colleges, this massive growth in the numbers over the last 2 years? Because the minister said that they've been able to have an uncapped international student system for decades now, but what they've seen in the last 2 years, the numbers that were accepted to get into colleges in Canada were much higher than what was even approved to come into Canada. How do you explain that?
We do see some individuals who are accepted to attend one of our colleges, and then will be accepted to work to study in a community college or a university. And they will transfer over because of the postgraduate work permit that those institutions are able to offer that my members are not able to offer. We've seen that. I want to go back and just comment quickly. His comments about Brampton and Mississauga and Surrey, we agree. We have the same concerns. Communities cannot be overwhelmed with international students, and that's why we've been working with his department and the government of Ontario to try and find solutions to those issues. But we cannot add more students in some of those communities.
One of the issues, of course, is housing, and while this isn't a housing announcement, there is the potential to reduce competition for student housing in particular. And the argument we heard from people like Mike Moffat, who's an economist who presented here today to Cabinet, was that the growth in the student population creates an incentive for investors to buy a family home, turn it into student housing, and that takes stock and supply out of the market and makes things more difficult. Universities often have residences or some measure of student housing that doesn't necessarily exist in the private college system. What role do you think your industry can play in dealing with some of the housing challenges that international students are creating?
So we have partners that we're working with, like Forest Day and others that we're going to be announcing soon, where we try and coordinate more of that housing for our members. This housing issue has become a new concern. And I would challenge some of the numbers that are out there around the number of residences that are available in colleges or universities compared to the number of students that are there. I think we all know stories of housing shortages. We are working hard on that. I would add, we need to build more houses, and the people we train are the ones who build those houses. Our skilled trades colleges do a wonderful job.
So Michael Sangster, I mean, what is the bottom line of these policy changes for your sector and post-secondary education writ large? Because we've seen international students become an important source of revenue for public colleges and public universities as well. I mean, what do you think the bottom line to this change would be for the 550 institutions you represent?
There will be an impact for some institutions. I will say this, it is a lot less than is being assumed, because we don't believe we have the numbers in our institutions. We've called on governments to release the numbers of where international students are placed, and we would welcome that. I don't think we're going to have the impacts that people assume we're going to have.
Michael Sangster, CEO of the National Association of Career Colleges. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.